Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tigre Gardenia. I want to share with you in this episode some research that I've been working on over the last few years. Now, this is one of those types of situations where, as usual, I think you're starting to get used to this with me. I will stumble over my words, but I'm so excited about bringing to you this research and the work that I do both individually with myself as well as in groups and with my clients, that I prefer to sit here and stumble through it and help you understand the difficulty in explaining this than not bring it to you at all. So hopefully you'll bear with me and you'll understand that here in Damanhur, which is the spiritual community that I live in, we consider ourselves a laboratory for spiritual research. So research in the sense of constantly working on things, on studying, on really pushing ourselves, on applying that is a constant way of life. It's built into our very philosophy. And a few years ago, I started working with a group to consciously expand my subtle body. And it led me to a very special plant companion that I've kind of told you about, but I'm going to tell you a lot more about in this episode. And I'm really excited about bringing this to you because even though this area of research in that particular group is not something that I'm working on directly, it's become an integrated piece of my overall personal development. And I think that that's the hardest part to understand is that because as a multi-potentialite, let me say that in a different way. As a multi-potentialite, I always have some area of research and experimentation going in lots of different directions. I'll pick up a language for a few years and then I'll switch over to another language, or I'll be working with a plant in this very specific way. And then all of a sudden I'll shift over. But remember, what I'm trying to get you to understand is that that's totally wonderful way of doing it if you're a multi-potentialite, as long as it all stays and you weave it back into your deep purpose and you understand how this sort of flows into your element or your archetype. So with having all these different passions and knowing my archetype so well, I'm able to then stop every once in a while and kind of just take stock of where I am. And right now, this is the perfect time of year to do this because we've come from the fall heading into the winter. And in the winter, so in the fall, we pull back all of the nourishment and we let drop off all the things that don't seem to serve right now. And then in the winter, we start to reflect on these types of things. And actually, in the following episode, I'm going to talk much more about a great way to do that. So you start to reflect on this and you start to understand and integrate peace. So this time of year, I will bring in everything that I've done, both consciously or like actively, I guess is a better way of talking about it in this particular context, as well as passively, things that maybe I had set in motion at a period of time, and now I'm bringing them back. I actually started to do this with a language again. I had started to learn German. I speak multiple languages, and I'm almost always studying something about a language. And so I had dropped off of German for a while and was focusing on some other things. And now I repicked up the German, and it's been fun to go back and see how, as much as I might have lost vocabulary, the grammar and syntax that I was having problems with before is now much easier and all of a sudden just flows. And that's because in the time that I wasn't actively studying German, other things that I was doing, I felt really comfortable and confident were bringing me back into. I realized that I was stumbling across the grammar. And so I set the intention of allowing that grammar to become a part of me through a different angle. And so working on other languages as well as other elements of communication have now made the grammar easier. So I tend to work actively, passively, but nothing ever goes away. And that's kind of just that multipotentialite mind. So when I look back at who I was when I started this particular area of research and working on my subtle body to who I am today, I can see just how much this journey has transformed my ability to imagine and desire. And that's what we're going to get into. And I can't wait to share it with you. So let's just get into this episode. This is episode 87, Expanding the Subtle Body with a Plant Partner. Welcome to Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigria Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious community. For over a decade, I've been known as a world ambassador for plant advocacy, working closely with plants to share their practical wisdom to help you consciously embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In this podcast, I delve into ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways of plants. Together, we'll explore how ecosystem thinking helps you overcome limiting beliefs, understand the true nature of relationships, and live an authentic, impactful life. Okay, so to kind of set this whole platform up to give you an idea of what it is that we're talking about, we're going to talk specifically about understanding what is the subtle body. This is a term that we use a lot in Damanhur, and it might have different terms and different philosophies that you might study. So I really want to explore the subtle body first and its significance. Why is this important? Then I want to go into, of course, how it is that the plants, in my case, how Dracaena really helped me and can be an aid in reawakening and reordering your subtle body layers. So how is it that this combination, and why is it that plants can be such great partners? You know, I'm always going to tell you that plants are great partners, by the way, right? That's the whole reason why we're here. I'm not here to convince you. I already know this part. What I'm hoping is I can give you a little bit of ideas of how it is to work with plants outside of kind of things that you've tried before. And then I'm going to get much deeper into imagination and desire itself, which were specifically imagination, which is the subtle body that I was working about. And I want to tell you a little bit about the journey and what I have discovered on this. By the end of this episode, I really want you to kind of have an understanding of what is the subtle body and its layers, at a minimum, something that sparks your curiosity to go off and study. We at Damanhur have a very rich understanding, because again, as we've been talking about little by little, you know, the composition of the soul, how the personalities fit in. And of course, once your personalities are connected, is that the right word? Once you understand how your personalities, and understanding the layers of the subtle body that help you connect in and express through those personalities, becomes really important. Also, I want you to understand, get some insight into different ways that you can work with and do this type of research with plant partners. Specifically, I want you to understand how it is that plants help you reawaken and train the different layers of your subtle body. And I want you to be able to explore and create your own connection and ways of working with a plant on this. So various different elements that are, I'm hoping, I'm crossing my fingers, that I get really good at describing this stuff to you, because as you know, it's all coming through and it's coming into me, and I have a lot of clarity, and I read through my notebooks and I'm like, oh, this is going to be easy to explain. And then I sit here in front of you and I'm like, and it's just because I want to put it into a form that is easy for you to understand, as well as comprehensive. So that's why I always tell you, if you have questions, please ask them. The more questions that you have, the more questions I get, the easier it is for me to explain things to you. But before we get into the details of this episode, I want to share with you one of our eco-conscious business partners. The first time I connected with a plant and actually received a response, I got chills. It's such an invigorating sensation when you make a breakthrough like that and realize just how connected we are, and that we are nature. As a nature-inspired mentor myself, I was super excited to stumble upon the Shift Network and its mission to empower a global network of evolutionary change agents. Talk about my kind of movement. There are so many inspiring thought leaders, healers, empaths, and other visionaries all under one roof, each one on an individual and collective mission to help you reawaken and co-create a just and prosperous world. Check out the show notes and click on the link to learn more about the Shift Network. Consider enrolling in a course or two. Their programs are the perfect complement to your evolving, naturally conscious life. All right, let's start off with kind of an easy question. What is a subtle body? Okay, not an easy question at all, but we'll pretend it's an easy question for our own purposes here. To understand the type of research that I did, I first had to really get into what the subtle body was. And then from there, I could ask the question, how is it that plants can help me, reawaken or reorder layers of my subtle body? Because I honestly had been at Her for many years by the time I started this research, and we had talked about the subtle body, but I had never gone into it to really understand what it means. In its simplest form, you could think your subtle body is your aura, right? So if you follow auras, you know that your auras are made up of different layers. And these different layers are subtle parts of your body. They are an extension of your physical form, or you could just say the counterpart to your physical form. And they are different faculties and different abilities that are within the layers outside of your body. In Her, we know that there's about at least 88, different layers to your aura, and yet we only use about 3. Other schools I have been on talk about like the 8 main layers, maybe going out to 16. Every philosophy has its own kind of understanding. And if you're somebody who's done a lot of work with auras and really understands the different layers, get in touch with me, because I really want to compare and contrast from, the Damanhurian philosophy and what I've learned from there, and what other opportunities could come and what other kinds of definitions could exist. So please contact me. I want to know. But basically, if you think about these different layers of the aura, what I learned in my study was that each one of these layers could be reawakened, prepared, even trained, which leads to the liberation of new abilities and experiences and faculties within you. So each layer holds some aspect of you at the subtle level that can then be consciously used in order for you to affect the physical layer. In some ways, you could say that the subtle body represents the sum of all the connection points between the soul and the physical body. And so it's what allows the sort of soul and the soul construction that includes the personalities to express itself in the physical form. They collect what's thought of probably as paranormal abilities, because we haven't been able to describe them or test them from a physical scientific perspective, and the exaltation, right? That extra element of your senses. So in some ways, what we were talking about last episode, where we were talking about your senses and expanding on your senses, is also tied into reconnecting and working with the different layers of your aura or of your subtle body. They also contain different qualities that you might have acquired physically as well as non-physically, arts that you may have learned, some more creative abilities, all kinds of different abilities in generals. Basically, everything that is a result of your talents can be housed and or contained within your aura. And therefore, working with your aura or working with your subtle body allows you to, let me think about the great way, a better way of saying this. It allows you to flow between the physical and the non-physical, and to learn from both and yet still apply it. And because it is the connection point, kind of the bridge, you might say, which is kind of funny talking about my element, but it's the bridge between the physical body and your soul. It also it's almost kind of one of the places where both of these types of abilities, physical and non-physical abilities, inner senses and outer senses, all these different parts can then interact with one another. So you see why I wanted to consciously learn how to work with these parts. I mean, most of us talk about our aura, and we might be able to read our auras. I've had some amazing, I just remembered that. Ooh. Okay, remind me at near the end, when I'm trying to tell you a little bit about what I discovered, I'm going to tell you about an aura reading I had after I had been working on this for about a year. Because I just thought, I wish I had it. I might still have it somewhere. If I find it, I will let you know, and I'll show it to you. I'll show you the picture of it. So you can understand, though, in all of this, why I really wanted to work with the aura, because, each layer of your subtle body is connected and sensitive to some form of your human faculties. In other words, the more that you connect in to the layers of your subtle body, the more refined your ability to use human faculties, and also faculties that apply in the physical, as well as non-human, that also can be brought out through that. They have characteristics and abilities that can be reconnected and stabilized for conscious use. And that was something that was really exciting to me. I decided to work specifically on reawakening my subtle body of imagination. That was where I chose to go. I kind of was looking through some of the subtle body layers that have been identified here in Damanhur. And as I was working through the list and trying to also just connect into myself to see what would be important, what could be useful for me at the time. I kind of had two goals, but in the end, I tried to set the intention for both at the same time, and it didn't really work. I ended up kind of going back to one. So my first one was the subtle body of imagination, because imagination is something that's always felt somewhat distant from me, as if imagination in its fullest form was kind of always out of reach. I tried also to simultaneously work on the idea of awakening something unknown completely to me. In other words, I was trying to get the plant partner that I had to work with me on finding something new, but it turned out to be too much. I mean, just the idea of working on imagination was so far out of my realm that it turned out to be better to just focus the research, or just let that be the main part. I wanted to turn something that was instinctual, something that just existed in some way that I couldn't tap into or control. I've never been somebody who could close her eyes and kind of have a totally imaginative state, or somebody that could draw an unseen world, or who could experience and describe, like as a novelist that just creates something out of nothing. And probably there's some conditioning inside of me. My mother is a very literal person. And as a matter of fact, we always joke in my family, because my mother just kind of almost doesn't get jokes. She's so literal. She doesn't even use, in my culture, using kind of cliches and expressions is very common. And yet my mother doesn't use these at all, which is kind of funny because both of my brothers do. And I think I kind of got the middle of it, where I sort of use a few of them that I've learned, but I don't have a connection to that sort of imaginary world. I didn't have a rich imaginary friend and all those types of other stuff. So I don't know if it's conditioned out of me to not be that way, or if it's just something that wasn't really awakened at the time of my birth. Who knows what it is, but it wasn't there. And since this particular subtle body layer is connected, imagination is connected to the inner sense. I don't want to get too far into this, because then I'd have to give you an entire explanation of what our inner sense is. But in Damanhur, as parallels to your physical senses, there's also your external senses. There are these inner senses, and 5 main ones to be particular. And one of them is the inner sense of desire. And desire is not exactly the same thing as just wanting. It's a step beyond. It has a much more divine or subtle phrasing to it, and color to it. But let's just say it's also something that's been outside of my purview. I don't really desire for things and then manifest them in that traditional way. I'm just really good at kind of creating the next step and seeing how things move forward and expanding through there. So I wanted to try something different and connect that imagination to desire in another way. There are so many layers to this itself that I could explain, but bear with me. It's a lot of information, and it was just something that made a lot of sense for my life and for the way that I described. Plus, I wanted this because I wanted to also be able to work with my clients' desires. Obviously, many of my clients come to me with their desires, and they have and some of them have super vivid, very active layers of imagination. And I've always felt that that was a really great way for me to then tap into it, because my bridge possibility, my element, allows me to connect in and very much understand at a visceral level. I'm kind of a chameleon like that. Chameleon is not the right, but it's a very empathic ability. And so I could bring that into myself, but I wanted to be able to meet them where they are. And so I thought that this was a great aspect. Also, so much of this has to do with alternative logic and lateral thinking. Really, the whole concept of imagination is around looking at things in a completely alternative way, or maybe even bringing in an entirely different form of logic. Now, you know that I'm a lateral thinker, and the idea of expanding this skill was just so exciting, and especially to be more conscious in using it, because I'm really good at seeing things from a different point of view. But I wanted to be able to, which is something I've been working with plants, see things from a point of view that was completely unexpected. I felt super appealing of the idea of really expanding even more on my ability to be that alternative thinker and that imaginator. Yeah, imaginator. I'm going to use that word, imaginator, especially because with the last few years and the work that I've done with my communication skills, I feel like, especially right now, when so many of us are struggling to talk to one another and to get our points across, my ability to tap more into that unknown space and imaginative space, yet mirror that and not mirror, marry that with my communication skills, I thought could be a really great way of bringing in that new paradigm that we keep talking about. I really want to be a more active participant in the bringing in of a whole new paradigm into our world, especially a paradigm that includes, humans and other kin. So anyways, that's just a little bit of my thinking. It's a lot of different pieces as to why I chose to go down. There's a lot more that I can say, but in the end, it was a starting point, right? You need to have a starting point, and I felt like that was a really good starting point for me. And so, because plants are alternative thinkers as well, and since they don't follow your traditional conditioned human logic, I thought, well, wouldn't it be perfect to just work with a plant on this? Besides the research group that I was in, we were all working with plants. That was the whole point of the group. The group's focus as a whole was on expanding and awakening senses, or in my case, subtle body layers, working with a plant. And each person had a plant. It was really actually quite fun to see also the different plants that people chose. One was working with an avocado plant that had grown up in her house, and another person was working with a spider plant. It was a really fun time. So I wanted to choose a plant in this particular case that kind of knew humans already. So a plant, I knew I wanted to work with a house plant. I wanted to work with a plant that had a human experience and who had spent time with their aura mixing in with my aura. And so I went around my house trying to understand what plant could be a plant that wanted to partner with me on this. I wanted a plant that had that human connection and yet maintained a certain level of otherworldliness, because I feel like that combination of the two would be really helpful for the type of work that I was doing. And hence, I choose to work with Dracaena, which also is called mother-in-law's tongue or snake plant. And this was a plant that I had never worked with in this type of capacity. I've had always snake plants in my house, but not a plant that I had kind of made a conscious connection with. So the first thing I needed to do was ask whether or not this particular Dracaena, which is interesting that up until the time I started working with this plant, and actually it's not true, other than this plant, I call the rest of them snake plants. Just it rolls off my tongue. It's the way that I address. Yet, Dracaena, or as I lovingly call Key, no name Dracaena, and we'll get into why in a minute, um, I've always called Dracaena, even though Key is a snake plant. Now, if you're watching on the video, you're watching me point to the fact that Dracaena is in the background right now. And Dracaena sits in the middle of my, my office-y space. Because Dracaena is, since the time we started working on this, is always present and is always a plant that I connect with on a regular basis, because, like I said, I might not actively be working on this right now, but I'm passively working on this. And therefore, Dracaena always kind of is there with me through this. And there are moments where I might, do a meditation in the morning, or have a moment where I can feel Dracaena call to me and tell me, hey, well, actually, Dracaena doesn't say anything, but that's another thing altogether, and I will get there. So, um, when I got the go ahead from Dracaena that it was like, okay, I want to work on this, it it really changed the way I worked with plants, because up until then, excuse me, I would say that the majority of my work with plants had been verbal in some way, shape, or form. Meditations or asking questions, getting responses. A lot of it had been through intellectual channels. There are other parts of my body that were coming online, and there were other senses that were coming online. But the end result, how I would get it from the plant and how it would eventually come out of me, was usually coming out through words. Now, you have to understand, you have to see that I am Cuban American, which means, as you can tell from right now, I have always talked with my hands. So much so that I have had a friend who, in the past, when we would argue, would like hold my arms down to get me to shut up. So that tells you how much I talk with my hands. But even though I'm in a culture that technically also talks a lot with their hands, it's a very codified way of talking with their hands. And I'm in the north of Italy, not in the south. So not as much expression as you would experience if you were in the south. So one of the things that I learned from working with Dracaena is about my body. My body became a very big part of this research. And 2 years later, I am in awe at how different my ability to imagine is, and how different I kind of step into concepts, and how my entire sort of way of being with no, it's not even new information. Let's just say things have very much changed in the physical body, which is interesting. When as I was saying before, the subtle body is what bridges physical manifestation and the soul's desire, and the soul in general, and the expression of the soul and personalities. And I agree with this. Like, I have felt this in my own body. It's as if I have access to a completely different way of experiencing and manifesting in the world. And my manifestations are crisper. My ability to experience the world is richer, with more color, with more light, with more sensation, all coming through this sense of imagination. And so I really, at the very beginning, was I invited Dracaena into this exploration. And specifically at first, when I would study, the first way that I worked with Dracaena was literally through my studies, because, like I said, I had to first understand what the subtle body was. So in trying to understand what the subtle body was, I started to do research into the subtle body. And what I would do was do that research with Dracaena, and I would first set the intention, and I would invite Dracaena into what I was doing. I wanted to see if it would change my comprehension of the material, if it allowed me to more easily find material that I wanted to study, and to find a direction to go to. And this was something that very quickly was confirmed to a certain extent, because there's so much material out there about the aura, but also even at Dominher, we have an entire archive filled with material, and the archive's not always so easy to look through. And yet, when I would sit there with Dracaena, all of a sudden I found very important editorials and booklets that had been written around the subtle body that I had never seen in my more than 10 years here at the time. And so that was the first place that Dracaena and I started to work with. We started to work together in helping find the most important information that would be useful for this type of experimentation. And then another step of that was to ask Dracaena for advice or to for the direction of the physical experimentation. What was it that I was supposed to do, or what could I do to reawaken imagination? I didn't want to go the old cliche way of, oh, well, let me just sit there and try to draw. By the way, up until this time, I had never drawn pretty much in my life. I am not a doodler. I did not draw. I've never owned art materials other than like I found some colored pencils that some guest left in my old nucleo. And I had that. I had never owned an art set or I don't ever remember having materials. That doesn't mean I'm not creative. I have creative. I mean, I have a degree in music and I love to sing. So I had specific areas of creativity, but even in my music, one of the things that was a little bit challenging for me, I have a degree in music engineering and electrical engineering, but it's in the School of Music. So I had to take, I have my principal instrument and I was part of the choir and I was, a pianist and all these things. But I have always really just read music. I've never created music myself. I don't have, like I've said, that type of creativity. And I didn't want to just push that type of imagination and creativity onto myself. I wanted to see what would naturally unfold. So one part was asking Dracaena to help me study. I'm going to go looking through the archive now, help guide me to find the right type of material. Or I would read something out loud and I would just sit and I would ask Dracaena to listen as I read something, and I would let that sink into my body and see where it took me from there, connecting in as much as possible to Dracaena to get there. But also I wanted to find what was the right way to experiment. How do I physically move this subtle body of imagination? And it turned out that was kind of what exactly I needed to do, right? I wanted to, I needed to start to move into imagination rather than trying to, I don't know, draw myself into it or creatively reach it in a more kind of artsy form. So my goal in all of this, connecting to imagination and eventually desire, was to understand, to feel, to consciously relate in some way to imagination in whatever way or direction that would take. I was Look, I'm a pretty logical person. I know I don't seem like I am, and even my alternative logic has a logic. And for most of my life, that sort of Taurusy side of me was really there. But as I've gotten older, more of this sort of Aries visionary side is coming in. But for me, it always still felt, I know that others won't agree with this because others can't see 10 years in advance, but I'm a projector, so I can see 10 years in advance. And so where I was going and my visions for things, my ability um, to kind of show you the bigger picture in my way of being is still a logic based response. In other words, even alternative logic, my mind sees how all these pieces fit together in a giant puzzle in front of me, and then I can describe that puzzle. There's really not any kind of rogue piece or any kind of odd shapes in those puzzle pieces before I started doing this work. It's still very tied to what is known to me, even if what is known to me is getting put together in a way that maybe you don't see it because my logic is alternative or probably neurodivergent. Actually, it is neurodivergent and all these types of things. But I wanted in this process to tap into something broader, something that was less tied to the physical world. I wanted to really think or feel beyond my limits. I wanted to activate a form of imagination outside of anything I had ever thought of before. Because what I learned was that reconnecting, realigning, liberating, or even recomposing the parts that make us who we are in our subtle sense gives us an opportunity to extend their fields of action. The more we sort of break them apart and put them back together again, we allow them to be put back together in ways that expands how much they can operate in this world of form that we live in. It's as if all of our humanness moves our subtle layers out of their natural order. Like the more that we're conditioned, the more they're constrained into this very tight pack. And doing this work gave me the opportunity to work with a layer to find its placement. In other words, I could take that layer of imagination I was working with and probably whatever layers are connected to it, although I've never been able to, I haven't actually tried yet to understand what those are, but to kind of stretch them and play with them. And in doing all of this type of what turned out to be motion, is unlocked more of their powers, more of their true essence. And in that, in turn, I was able to touch more of my own essence, my own true nature. Another good way to think of this is about like reordering your subtle body. By the way, you can also do it not as consciously, but you can do some of this by walking spirals, which is why we highly recommend here at Dom and Her to walk spirals. But that's another topic for another day. The thing is that your soul body, your subtle body, not your soul body, your subtle body facilitates your soul's ability to manifest in the world of form or in the physical. It aids in the use of your talents and in your connections with others. Remember, our auras are so large that inevitably we're bumping into another person's aura every time we walk even remotely near one another. And that includes other types of beings as well. So every time you walk near plants, and imagine being immersed in your house, all of these auras are crashing into you. And so this gives me the opportunity to now more consciously sense my own aura versus the aura of others, my subtle body, how it's reacting. I wouldn't really know yet how to put into words everything that I've awakened, or beyond what I've already tried to explain what I was looking for, but all I can say is that it was super important and changed the way that I am. It required me to be much more attentive and to have constancy in the work that I was doing and awareness. And Dracaena really helped me find much more of that. Notice I do not use the words disciplined or focused. In this period of this 2 years, if you go back through, when I went back through my notes to try to prepare for this episode, I found the word self-discipline and focus. But I realized that this period of time, this imagination work with Dracaena, helped me understand that discipline and focus are not it. Constancy, yes, but constancy because you're so stimulated that you're consistently doing the things that you want to be doing. You're aware of it, and therefore you can make choices on it. You're present because you're connecting into that plantness of yourself for that presence and that attention. And Dracaena helped me really understand all of this without having to put anything into words, because that's why I call Dracaena no name Dracaena. Dracaena does not like to talk. All of my mental chatter was kind of thrown out the window. Dracaena said, if you want to communicate with me, sure, you can try to send me words, and that's fine, but I'm not going to send you words back. I never sat there and received a transmission that I wrote down or meditated in or had a meditative conversation with Dracaena. Dracaena would make me get up and move. Key held space even when I couldn't. And Key helped me get out of my head and into my body. And rediscovering my body, the person, I had been a dancer for so many years, and then I kind of dropped it. I had been an actor for years, and then I dropped it. All these different ways that I had always used my body as a form of understanding and expression. You know, the person that when she's studying would like move around the room, the person who when she's trying to think would pace back and forth, and who used so many other elements that were connected to the body, such as colors and perfumes, but slowly started to put them under structures. I had forgotten how to use colors and perfumes in a non-structured way because for a long time, thanks to my Kabbalistic training, I was using them with, you know, very specific patterns. When I smell this, it means that. When I see this color, it's connected to this thing. And that is a good base. But the beauty of having a great base is that then you can deviate from it because you can explore and you can check into that base and then see how you're supposed to adjust it for yourself. Now, when I work with colors and perfumes and the movement of my own body, it's with way less structure and much more fluidity, playing with how their relationships interact. You can say that in some ways this work activated my physical body as well as my physical sense of smell. Not so much perfumes with specific definitions like myrrh means this or this type of scent means that, but more like what I was speaking about in the last episode about allowing that scent in those chemical receptors to come into those chemical signals to come into my body, and that my body would distill it. And then through movement, I just realized that I started to do yoga consistently every morning 2 years ago. And that was totally organic. It wasn't part of the plan, but I just realized. And over the last few months, I've switched from vinyasa style, like more movement yoga to more yin and deep stretches that I hold in like a contemplative meditation. Wow, I'm just now, as I'm talking about this, putting together different elements of this. Ultimately, all of these pieces, all of this, which truly other members of my research group also discovered in the things that they were working on with their plant partners, what we all sort of converged on was that all of us, plants, humans, every being, is made of the same substance, which is love. Unconditional love is really our true essence. And that when you tap into that, you sort of power the generator that allows all these other different nuances of that love. And I'm not a lovey person. Like, I'm not the kind of person that talks about like kumbaya love type stuff. So bear with me as I'm saying these words because they're kind of, whoo, I am moving into something new. But it's what allowed all of this. It's what Dracaena taught me how to enter into rather than think about. It was what my body feels into rather than my mind has to convince me to do. So it just changed. And now I close my eyes sometimes when I'm in bed at night or yeah, mostly at night, I can close my eyes and there's this movement of light and color, even in the deep darkness that I've never experienced before. There's my clothing choices have changed. There's a combining of things. I now paint. I've never painted before in my life. And I started thinking I was going to learn how to paint, and then I said, screw it. And now it's much more abstract work. And I'm not saying that you can't have structured things with your subtle body of imagination, because of course your imagination makes up scenes and stuff like that. And sometimes you need structure. And I do that too. I'm learning how to connect into things that I've never seen, shapes that I've never experienced before. And all of this is starting to express itself through me thanks to this work. And I can feel that this is pushing into a new sense of understanding what desire is, not from the egotistical or base ego sense of I want, but more from the heart opening kind of gushy way of looking at the world. It's again hard to explain, but oh, so rewarding. So many small little steps that lead to where I am today. Some conscious, some still somewhat unconscious, some active because it's what I'm working on, some passive. So, whatever it is that you choose to do, just keep doing it. Keep moving forward. Keep thinking about new ways to stretch yourself. And if you're doing something and it feels hard and icky and you don't like it, switch to something else. Make a small change to it. If somebody gives you a technique, even if I give you a technique, change one little thing in it, make it yours, and ask your plant partner what to do, what direction to take, how you can collaborate and co-create on this. This is really a great way to do it. An easy exercise that you could do to try is if you're trying to study something, anything, doesn't matter what it is. If you're reading, for example, for it, invite a plant into the reading. In other words, stop for a second before you start and invite the plant into the reading. Read consciously thinking that you're reading for both of you. And then afterwards, ask the plant to help you better understand. Because again, their alternative logic, their different way of seeing the world can help you better understand things outside of our traditional human logic. Plus, it's always fun to dance and to draw. Just invite plants into more of the things that you do and listen as they maybe shift it from the way that you've always done it. Just really tune into your intuition with the work that you're doing with plants, and follow that intuition, follow what you feel drawn to. Expanding your subtle body with the help of plants is really an evolutive journey. It's a journey that takes time, but it can unlock some amazing new abilities and experiences. And by working closely with plants, you can reconnect and stabilize different layers of your own subtle body for conscious use. And this will change the way you interact with the world, because as your subtle body is interacting with others, it's gaining new information. Imagine if it has the full breadth of its abilities when it's having these interactions that are sometimes flowing through your personalities, but are sometimes flowing from subtle body to subtle body. This process not only enhances your imagination, as it did with me, or any other subtle body that you choose to work with, but it also deepens your connection to the world around you, making you more confident as you walk and traverse through it, as you make choices, as you start to take action. And remember, I'm here to support you every step of the way to help you reach your goals. And I'm curious in all of this, have you ever felt a plant deeply influence your inner world? Like, what part of your subtle body are you longing to awaken or even expand? And are there specific plants that are calling to you as partners that want to be on this journey with you? I would love to hear your thoughts on those questions and on pretty much everything I talked about in this episode. So remember to share your stories and insights about your own experiences with your aura, your subtle body, and the different layers that make it up in the comments. Or, come into the Naturally Conscious community. I truly value your perspective. And I think that the more that we share these perspectives, the more we allow ourselves, we help mirror ourselves and show us other opportunities. And if any of this sparked something in you, come join us in the Naturally Conscious community, the only space that's designed to nurture these types of human-plant relationships. But before I wrap this all up, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. When you share, you help others like you discover this podcast and join the conversation. And if you need support on your own evolutive journey, let's talk about how I can help you. Everything you need is in the show notes. Well, that's it for this episode. Remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for now. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. To continue these conversations, join us in the Naturally Conscious community, your premier online ecosystem for plant reawakening and accelerated evolution and co-creation with other kin. Here, you'll find expansive discussions, interactive courses, live events, and supportive group programs like the Plant Wisdom Book Club and the Sprouts Writing and Creativity Group. Connect with like-minded individuals collaborating with plants to integrate these insights into life. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. That's it for me, Tigrea Gardenia, and my plant collaborators. Until next time, remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. I'm out. Bye.